Won't be long before those things be back pounding their way in here. They're afraid now. They're afraid of fire. I found that out. There's a radio in the truck. I had jumped in to listen to it when a big gasoline truck came screaming right across the road. But there must have been 10, 15 of those things chasing after it. The truck went right across the road. Slammed on my brakes to keep from hitting it myself. It went right through the guardrail. Ripped over a gas pump and never stopped moving. By now it's like a moving bonfire. Still hear the man screaming. This thing is just backing away from it. I looked back at the diner to see if there was anyone there who could help me. It was when I noticed that the entire place had been encircled. There wasn't a sign of life left. By now there were no more screams. I realized that I was alone with 50 or 60 of those things, just standing there, staring at me.
On The Substance, a podcast aimed at being biblical, thoughtful, and human. Join us every other week as we engage the culture without the culture war. I'm your host, Philip Marinello, joined by my hosts and pals here, Trevor Aiken.
Hey, what's up?
And Vincent Edwards.
What's going on?
Vince, I guess we're going to have to apologize to you for making you watch a black and white movie, but I hope we can get through this.
No, don't take any offense.
It's important. It's health food. It's good for you.
I'm just wondering if the original audience would have felt that it was a wholesome health food movie.
Oh, I can't wait to get into that. Well, There's so much
good.
The movie I talked about earlier today and this movie, I'm like, man, what are we going to talk about in 1 hour? Like,
oh my goodness.
I feel like you could do a 10-episode miniseries on this.
All right.
So
welcome to our podcast.
Welcome to our podcast, which is The Substance. The Substance is a Christian variety show, and every other week now we talk for about an hour or so of some things related to Christianity, culture, and the arts. Sometimes we have great guests on, like today. Previous guests include Alyssa Wilkinson, Brett McCracken, Tyler Huckabee, and Mike White of the Projection Booth podcast. Other times we chop it up amongst ourselves, and then at the end here, us or our guest are going to share some shout-outs, things we've been finding engaging, edifying, or enjoyable here. So welcome to The Substance. And today, like you guys said, we have a guest, Chicago's own Josh Larsen. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's October. It's time to watch scary movies, and I'm glad for the chance to talk about one that's in my top 10 horror movies of all time, actually.
Very
so
nice.
You guys picked a good one.
Yeah.
Nice.
So top 10. Trevor, where does this land for you? I know you're not a big horror guy.
Lists? I'm not even a big list guy on movies.
Initial thoughts without getting too into it.
Okay, so understanding that it came out in 1968, it makes sense that it's a horror movie for that time. To myself, like watching it, it just felt like a thriller, you know, like I enjoy the zombie genre in a way, whether it's zombie based video games or Shaun of the Dead, you know, kind of comedy / horror, I guess, film, or what was it, 28 Days Later?
Yeah.
Yeah, stuff like that. I enjoy the whole genre, so I really found this to be an engaging and fun movie to watch. I think anybody who's seen those other things and not seen this, it's a really cool opportunity to kind of see where it all started.
And that's why I picked it for this one. I figure with our brand of being The Substance, I know plenty of times we do talk about more modern movies, but I was like, this is the source of so many things, and you don't usually get that in movies. But we can talk about some of that going forward. Vince, what are your where are you initially right now as we start this?
You know, I will say, as I think about it, because I probably have watched it the most recently because I finished it today, and it's not bad. If I'm putting myself
Night
in
of
the
the Living Dead,
mindset,
not bad. Vincent Edwards.
So if I'm thinking about, like, okay, if I'm in the 60s, so World War Z, I've never seen that. You know, Walking Dead, I've never seen that. You know, then that being the first kind of movie in that like space, that probably would have been like jaw dropping. Like
Yeah, they
that
didn't
would
even
have
have
broke
the
my brain.
word zombie for this type of thing.
Exactly.
I'm glad that they changed the name. The initial name of the movie was Night of the Flesh Eaters, because that's really kind of what they were going for. Like,
Maybe more accurate, actually.
yeah, flesh eating monsters
They
were
was
not really
lunching,
a
yeah.
thing that was depicted on film up until that point.
Yeah, and I mean, I was listening to some stuff today about the film, and from today's standards, right? And when we think about a colorized movie and like all the practical and CGI effects and everything, somebody from today watching this movie, it probably doesn't seem gory, but I mean, there's people, there's these ghouls as they call them in the movie, like gnawing
It's
down on
thrilling.
some viscera, you know, like
It's thrilling. If you give yourself to this movie, even as a jaded modern audience, it's thrilling. Josh, as our guest, horror is an important thing to you, right? You've got your upcoming book, and is it correct that your first paid review was Interview with a Vampire?
Yeah, that's right, actually. 1994. That's the one I actually got a check for.
Nice.
And my relationship for horror, though, started probably too young. I was in, at a family Sunday night gathering where the kids are just kind of thrown in the basement, which is where I think I first encountered on TV something like The Shining and
Oof.
Psycho as well. So these are edited for TV versions, but
Sure.
still, even in that format, I probably shouldn't have seen it when I was, I don't know, maybe 10, something like that. So I recovered, survived, and I think as I got older and got more into film, I appreciated about horror particularly is that's where you can see, I think, a lot of the aesthetic choices that a filmmaker makes in terms of how to achieve these scares, how to get those reactions from the audience. Where should I place the camera? How should I use the music? How fast should I edit? What sort of cinematography should be involved? And so the more I got into movies as a serious watcher of film, I realized that a lot of this interesting stuff was being done in horror. So I think that was more of my entry point than just someone who, wanted the gore or even really appreciated the thrilling experience. It was more that artistic lens.
Sure.
And then I kind of came around to liking certain subgenres of horror more than others. And I think the zombie subgenre is one of the more fascinating ones, not only for these aesthetic reasons, but I think it just asks so many interesting theological and philosophical questions about, what it means to be alive, what it means to kill, and what it means for the people who are in like those spaces in between life and death. There is at once nothing to think about in a zombie movie because you're just terrified and want to get those windows boarded up. And there is everything to think about in a zombie movie. And I find that the ones that create enough space for you to do that thinking are some of the real masterpieces in the subgenre.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I was thinking in this movie, I'm excited to hear your thoughts on where zombie horror fits in cinema. So, Josh, I want to hear more about your thoughts on kind of the zombie overall, because as I was watching it and rewatching it and thinking about it this week, I mean, I know there are other monsters, but as far as the pillars of horror, is it safe to say I feel like zombie is maybe the only monster or horror creature that cinema actually created with this film? Like Frankenstein, Dracula, like those things were literary things ported over into film. Like you have other like werewolves, you have other creatures from literature to film. I mean, I Am Legend was about vampires, which inspired George Romero, and he kind of took the twist on, well, what would the beginning of the whole I Am Legend scenario, what might that look like? He came up with this and kind of started his own new thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, you'll find fragments of this, I think, in earlier films, something like I Walked with a Zombie, which is more of that's really more of someone who's under a spell in a way, or catatonic. But there are some elements of that, and that deals, of course, with issues of voodoo practices that are coming into that. So that's sort of a different connotation. And then you can go all the way back to something like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is also somewhat of this undead type figure in a way. But yeah, Romero is the one who gave us this modern conception and this idea of the really visceral notion of devouring other humans, which is maybe the most horrific element of the zombie movie, and yet of course connects with what is also terrible about the genre for me, is that this could happen to any of us. And it's often in these movies people we know or love
Mm.
who suddenly turn and do the devouring. I
Mhm.
don't know if we do get some of that in Night of the Living Dead,
Oh, yeah.
especially with the family that is in the basement, right? I mean, that's
Yep.
sort of a horrific moment when it's the child who is attacking.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there'll have a few spoilers, I imagine, for
It's
this quite old movie. But yeah, so there are a lot of terror levels at work that I think Romero added to those elements that might have existed before.
Yeah. You mentioned your appreciation for horror, the genre itself. And now I know people in general don't like horror films for whatever reason, but you will get some believers who are like, a Christian shouldn't engage in that genre of film. So to the person that might think that, what would be your either encouragement or just what would that conversation kind of look like?
It's an understandable concern, right?
Sure.
Because horror, maybe more so, or certainly as much as any other genre, I think can lead itself towards exploitation.
Mm.
And for me as a Christian
Mm.
viewer, that's one thing that, you know, I that I want to look out for and be discerning about when I sense that movies are exploiting violence or sexuality or exploiting us as viewers. And certainly that takes place within the horror genre because it's a genre that deals with fear, deals with the things that make us uncomfortable and make us fearful. Well, it's going to deal in violence most often. Sometimes that's actual physical violence, sometimes it's psychological violence. Those are things
Mm,
that could be exploited. Often horror deals with sexuality, and that is something that films have been exploiting since the very beginning. So I understand the concern because there are certainly films that lean that way that a Christian might want to avoid.
sure.
But I don't see that as a reason for writing off the whole subgenre or genre. And I would apply, the same sort of lens to it as I would any other genre of film, is to ask what is, first of all, to respect it as an expression of art from a fellow human being. And rather interestingly, this particularly applies to horror, going into that experience with fear and being worried about what might be bad or how it might hurt me.
Mm,
Instead, going into it first with a posture of curiosity and appreciation for the art and just being open to how it might speak to me and my experience, not meaning throwing discernment out the window, but
sure.
having that maybe be a part of my approach and not having this fearful approach be the way I lead myself into that viewing experience.
No, that's good.
I think that makes sense. It was interesting hearing about how in 68 cinema worked and how this film was kind of played on like a matinee time during the Saturdays when like there was no rating system. So there wasn't like you walked in, you're like, oh, Night of the Dead, Living Dead. Like they're going to be gnawing on having a human barbecue at some point. And so
No,
maybe I don't want to
audiences,
take.
particularly children, were not ready for this.
Yeah. Like maybe I shouldn't take my 7-year-old in there. Like, no, it's a matinee, Saturday is a silly thing. Maybe I'll take my kid in there. So there's like 7-year-olds in here watching this really like the power of this idea. Like that's what's crazy to me is that there's an idea present in this film. And yeah, like you were talking about, like there's other zombie movies, even Bela Lugosi in the 30s did White Zombie, and like kind of this trance like, usually there's like a voodoo, like
Yeah,
kind of taken
voodoo.
from
Your voodoo
Haitian
movies.
lore of like the voodoo master, right? But like
Mm,
taking this instead and turning it into, there's a, in their case, spoiler alert, there's the radiation, but in more modern conceptions usually it's a contagion of some kind, and then zombies are kind of everywhere, and you're in this zombie apocalypse and the dead are rising, and it's like, how are you going to live? And all of society's changed, and there's somewhat of this revolution. Like that's just, it's such a just captivating idea that you just then see it played out, and we don't get tired of it. We were still coming out with zombie stuff like today.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that shows you how rich the idea, or the richness the idea can lead to. Because if it was just this sense that these bodies are reanimated and they're attacking, you wouldn't get decades of variations on that to the degree that we have been. I think it's because it can stand in for other things. As you were saying, a contagion, a virus. Now all of a sudden you're playing on a different fear than the one in 68 that was related to, outer space, something from
Yeah.
outer space being involved, right?
Mm.
And so it's almost like the zombie idea can reform itself to embody whatever fear a particular time or era might have. And then it has a double terror going on.
I mean, even Romero himself did that. He made 6 Dead films, 5 of
Right.
which I'd agree are very good. I like 2 out of the 3 of his later ones, but each of his original trilogy, Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, and Day of the Dead, each of those 3 movies have very different societal ills or fears or things that he was exploring in relation to this thing that he had created, this I guess storytelling device that was used. And again, that's on substantive cinema. We want to look at things. It is fun entertainment in a way. Like, it's thrilling, like Trevor said, to watch these people barricade in a farmhouse or in a mall or in an army base. Like, that's a thrilling setup to see how they're gonna survive. But then very sneakily, like we've talked about before on the show, like how genre film or genre storytelling in general, you can take a premise that seems kind of maybe frivolous and really kind of pack a whole lot of punch in there.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Dawn of the Dead, because another Romero film that is interested in other ideas, you can say. There it
Yeah.
is, consumerism. Again, we're in
He was
the
done. He
80s
waited
now.
10 years in between those two because he's like, I made my movie, but then 10 years later, he saw all the supermarkets and all the big, like, mega malls popping up all over the place. And he goes, I think that's an interesting thing to talk about.
Well, and the metaphors work a couple of ways there, right? You have the initial joke where the survivors who are fleeing the zombies go to this mall, and the idea is that they're trapped by this world that was supposed to now offer them everything, right? Is supposed to just, you can buy whatever you want and you'll be whole. Well, now they are literally in this nirvana, this supposedly capitalistic nirvana, and they can't get anywhere out. It's a hell for them, right? And so, in a sense, they too are the zombies because they're just wandering around this mall. They can't go, they can't get out. There's a soullessness to them. Then, of course, the zombies get in and they become stand-ins for the American consumer, who is just mindlessly shuffling through these shops. And this idea of consumerism is at the very heart of that film, very different from what Night of the Living Dead was interested in.
Absolutely.
Flesh consumerism. Whoa.
Which, hey, if we had substantive cinema as its own show, I think that original trilogy, I'd love to cover all of them. It's a fascinating, and I think Diary of the Dead is actually a pretty underrated one too, myself. Have you seen that one, Josh?
Yeah, I haven't seen all of Romero's zombie films, but have jumped around. And I think the really interesting thing about them, Diary of the Dead for me, probably, a little less than those other ones.
Course,
but
sure.
again, just how it's a malleable metaphor, even in the hands of Romero. This subtext, the intellectual subtext he was always interested in, that's going to be a comment in his movies. And so here he starts to think about technology, right?
Yeah, social media, basically. The whole, like, if you didn't take a video or a photo, it didn't happen. Like, what would that mindset, like, how does that mindset work in the zombie apocalypse?
Exactly.
It's definitely lesser than his original trilogy, but I loved it. And Land of the Dead was all about race in America. Like, survival is not great, but I'm glad he got a paycheck.
Well, for folks who haven't seen this, sadly, and maybe should go watch it on whatever platform, can we give folks like a brief synopsis of what goes on? Because, like, I went into it and I had no idea what to expect.
Same.
And felt, I knew it was a horror movie, and I'm like not a horror movie guy, so I'm like, is this gonna get weird? Is it gonna get jumpy? Is it gonna get all these kind of different, I guess, stereotypes in my mind for horror? And then I found comfort in it being, oh, this is I know what this is. This is a zombie movie. It's great. So we want to talk plot for a second?
Josh, what would be your 30-second explanation of the
Yeah,
film?
I mean,
Or
you're
60.
right, Trevor. Everyone's going to be familiar with it because it's the people blockading themselves in a small space trying to keep the zombies out, right?
Mhm.
And in this case, it is a farmhouse, rural Pennsylvania, and it's initiated by a woman who had traveled to a cemetery with her brother to leave graves at their father's tombstone. And they're attacked there by a single solitary zombie. They don't know what's going
Mhm.
on. The brother's actually killed, and she flees
They're
to
coming to
this
get you, Barbara.
farmhouse. Great opening scene, right? Just
Yeah.
so
So good.
weird,
Yeah.
and you're not sure as a viewer what's going on either. So she gets to the farmhouse, and that is where she finds. Is that remind me now? Ben, who becomes the
Mhm.
main character, played by Dwayne Jones, is he already there, or where
Yeah.
does he run into her?
No, there's
He comes
a really
in.
cool bit of editing. He's there, like they're kind of meeting there.
They're kind
Like
of
they
meeting there.
both kind of find it.
And so they kind of barricade themselves in there, and then we realize there are other people already a little bit later who have holed up in the basement. So then you get another,
Like
really
society.
familiar, yes, example of what happens in these zombie movies is it's the people turning on each other, okay?
Yeah.
Dwayne Jones, a black actor. This is 68. Everyone else in this movie is white. So there's already that
Mhm.
unspoken element there, especially when one of the people comes up from the basement and this is not cool with him, right?
Yeah.
But anyone with half a brain knows that Ben is the guy you want to, there's no time for segregation here, people. And
Right.
anyone can recognize that with half a brain. You want to hang out with Ben, but this other guy is not seeing that. And so you have all these other tensions at play. Again, here's the societal commentary, which, man, I mean, we can get to in the end how the racial element
Mm.
plays out in the end, which has only become
Right.
more horrifying and landed with more of importance, I'd say, from what we've seen in recent years. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's again this societal tension dynamic that is at play throughout the rest of the film. So it's not only how are they going to keep the zombies out, but how are they going to not going to tear each other up inside at the same time?
Yeah.
That's good.
On the subject, I think that's a great synopsis. How they think about, are they going to be able to flee? Are they going to get to shelter? Are they going to be able to make it through the night? And then, as things are mopping up, what happens at the end? And one of the interesting things is like the aspects of race in the movie are, as you're watching it, you're like, okay, there's choices being made here. At the same time, Romero was like really adamant that like, no, I just like picked the guy who did the best reading and for the role, and like I didn't write it as a black character necessarily. He didn't
No,
write
he
it in
didn't. He
such a
wrote it
way.
as a white guy. Like Ben was
Yeah.
initially like a white trucker, but
Yeah.
then Dwayne came in and nailed the audition. They're like, okay, and they
And
basically
he was a much more educated dude. He was like, no, I'm not doing all these like accents and stuff that they had written in.
it was almost like Romero was too progressive, and he's like, like it's 19 because you even hear him in interviews go, oh, it's 1968, like we're gonna be fine. Like he didn't see it as changing any of the dynamics until the story he has told for years. I mean, he's no longer with us, but the story he had told for years was because back in the day, when you were distributing a film, you had to physically drive around to the different theaters in America if you were independent, show it for the distributors, and then have them sign a contract for how long they were going to show it. As they were driving around New York to kind of get distributors to sign on to show the movie, they heard on the radio that Martin Luther King had been assassinated, and then they're like, oh, the dynamics are a little bit different now. Like
Yeah.
our film's going to play a lot differently and more powerfully, really.
Yeah. I think that's what's interesting about the film is that in a sense, and not in a derogatory way, we know that there's problems with colorblind and that ideology. And I'm not saying that that's what he was trying to go for, but he was really trying to just be fair and not really worry about race in the way that he was addressing it. And that ended up being a powerful commentary, and it ended up creating this product which has such a powerful commentary on race in America. Like, even though he didn't go in to make that, and that's what's amazing, is that because of some of the very simple decisions he made, coupled with the context in which the movie is filmed, it ends up actually having these deep themes that are really interesting.
Yeah, I think it worked for the best in terms of what's on the screen because we have very subtext conscious horror movies right now, I think.
Mhm.
And I like that. I tend to like that. Something like Get Out, which the subject
Mm.
is race,
Yeah.
and I think it's
Yeah, it's so
brilliant
good.
for that. But I don't know if Night of the Living Dead would have worked as well if the subject was race in the same way, whether it was
Yeah.
naivete on Romero's part or, some sort of strategy he didn't really lead with. I think it makes sense that we just naturally come to sympathize with Ben, and because he's the most capable character, for one
Right.
thing, the most
Yeah.
fair person with a sense of justice
Mm.
that we share as audience goers. I think that is all important and at once separate from his race, because that's not how the movie plays it, but at the
Yeah.
same time where it brings us at the end, it's integral to who he is as a man and his experience in that country. And what he knows as a black man in 1968, is aware of in terms of danger that
Yeah.
some of the other characters might not be. All of that is at play without having to be explicitly stated.
Yeah.
And I think that is for the best in the case of Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what gives it such substance or resonance looking back on it. Like, seeing him, I couldn't imagine what that would be like, whether you're a black or a white viewer, seeing him in 1968 slap a white woman, like
Cool.
shoot a white man who was in his way, like that, because of the realities in America that obviously George Romero was he was a race conscious guy. He actively throughout his whole career was trying to spotlight women and minority people. Like he really was trying to do that, like, good work, but because of the reality of the artistic terms, the marketplace that his work was put into, it couldn't help but have those things because of the reality of society.
Yeah. What a performance too that Dwayne Jones put on. I mean, he's just very compelling and charismatic, and like you said, like from the beginning, finally, okay, somebody who knows who's actually going to be able to do something here about all this.
Decisive.
Yeah. You get really frustrated with Barbara's character after I mean, almost right away.
She's in shock.
Yeah, I said 5 minutes in. Like, come on, Barbara.
Get it together.
She's a woman in shock.
And I think that was also an interesting part, because there was a part where I related with the character Ben, when he's like, look here, come on now. And he's like going off on her, like, we're trying to survive. I need you to check in.
Oh, yeah.
And then he immediately corrects his behavior, and he's like, look, all right, I'm scared. You're scared. We're trying to get this. And then I was like, okay, that's fair. And that's one of the, another element that made it super relatable, just in general, because it's like, I probably would have wanted to turn up on her too. Like, yo, I need help. Let's board these doors up. Stop playing.
Trying to get chewed up here, Barbara.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
At the same time, that insertion of compassion and grace for the circumstance, I think also is important and relatable for sure.
Yeah, there are little moments of empathy here and there. You just named one good one, Vince, and then I think, isn't there the other woman who's in the basement, not the mother, but
Judy?
the girlfriend? Doesn't she have a moment with Barbara as well? I feel like I'm recalling one where at least two of the women one of them is consoling the other and just taking that breath together.
Yeah.
And it's not just all panic and all screaming and all attacks. And keep in mind, we haven't really mentioned explicitly yet, this was very low budget film.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
With inexperienced
It's
filmmakers and a lot of
beautiful.
actors. And for a movie like that, which we were talking about exploitation before, gone only for those shock elements and exploited this scenario in that way, the fact that a film like this takes moments to pause and breathe and allow humanity and empathy in, I think is another one of the reasons it's endured despite all the other zombie movies we've gotten.
Yeah.
Well, for me, that's kind of fascinating as somebody with light artistic aspirations. Like, you look at this movie that came out in 1968 that is still, in many ways, just as resonant today, so powerfully effective. And it was literally like made on a shoestring budget. Most of the financiers and producers appeared in the film because they were like, who do we know? Who can we get in front of this camera? The police and the helicopters and the canine units, like, those were all their local people that were excited to be in a movie.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, we can get some production value out of these canine units and this helicopter. And it's just like, that was lucky. Like, I thought it was one of my favorite funny stories that I saw from behind the scenes is when they went to Washington, D.C. to get some of those shots of the Capitol and like pretend that they were like interviewing generals and stuff like that, going like, hey, like, what's the government's response to this? Like, that was just like them and their friends, and they were like stealing those shots. Like, they didn't get any permits. Like, they knew they weren't supposed to be filming in DC, but like the Capitol guards thought that they really had a real general, and they're like, hey guys, like keep it moving and stuff like that. They thought they were the real thing. It's a movie kind of held together with like duct tape and love and aspiration, and it's such like that student film. It was his first real movie, and they're like, hey, we just got to finish this. Like, in the Romero's commentary track, he keeps talking about all the mistakes, and it's like, man, I've seen this movie a number of times, and I'm like, yeah, in a strict way, you could call this an amateur movie, but it's so
much
filled
skill
with
here.
heart, and it's so resonant. Like, the thing, yes, he made. You could call this an exploitation movie in a way. They're eating guts on the camera for maybe the first time in Hollywood history in like a real movie. Like, yeah, that's a shocking thing to see, but they're talking about real issues.
Yeah.
Like, this will resonate with you if you give yourself to the movie.
I couldn't help but think about like everything that you're talking about, Philip, in the context of another movie made in the 1960s, only 2 years prior, also on a shoestring budget, also mainly shot in front of just a house as the main staging, and how much better this film is than that film, being Manos Hands of Fate.
Oh, was that 66?
Manos the Hands of Fate comes out in 1966, made by some friends on a shoestring budget, and it's awful. Like, it's just absolutely awful.
See our April Fool's episode on that one.
And, you know, they had $100,000 less dollars, but at the same time, too, like, it's just everything about it is so bad. And when you see Romero's Night of the Living Dead and realize that essentially the underlying premises of like how it was made and you know, trying to get some friends together and one house that was going to be demolished that they rented out for like $300 a month or something that they could shoot in. And
what a lucky accident. They're like, yeah, we're going to destroy this house anyway. If you want to destroy it for your movie, you can. They're like,
there you
that's
go.
Production value that we definitely can't buy. We get to destroy this house on camera. We get to burn it down.
Yeah. And a lot of the action that feels very global actually comes from the radio and the TV.
Which were their friends in Pittsburgh who had radio shows that they're just like, yeah, you can shoot me for your movie.
Yeah. So just the writing and the scripting and the staging and everything, like, there's just so much skill brought to this movie made by some friends, you know, essentially, that elevate it, you know, into this thing that is still in the conversation. It has this really lasting impact. Can you imagine if like Manos the Hands of Fate idea had actually caught on and like everybody making Manos video games?
Well, I mean, couple in Vacation on Peril films, that's definitely a subgenre into itself.
Sometimes it takes, you know, seeing one of those low budget friend projects that didn't quite work to appreciate how, you know, miraculous it is that something like Night of the Living Dead is as good as it is.
Exactly.
Well, and I feel so bad for them too with the he didn't really make any money off it too because of the copyright issue, right?
Oh, I'm not familiar with that story.
They had Night of the Flesh Eaters copyrighted, And then when it eventually went, they changed it to Night of the Living Dead, but they forgot to change the copyright. So it's been and that's partially why you can view it on just about every streaming platform, because it became a public domain film.
Interesting.
Huh.
I didn't know that.
But I mean, the Library of Congress restored it, and that's the print that the Criterion have. So there's 100 cuts of this movie out there, but they have, in a way, it was helpful in keeping it restored. But he didn't really make a whole lot of money off that particular one. Which I mean, it's still showed now. Like Criterion just came out with a 4K of it, like in 2022. Like this is a movie that, as long as civilization, in 1990 they tried to do that. Which I did not see.
No, the blood was chocolate sauce, so that wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, black paint and chocolate sauce doesn't probably look very good in color.
Now, Josh, for the person that's a little bit more like me, enjoys the modern films a little bit more, lean into the color pictures and a bit of CGI, what would be your pitch to that kind of person to say, hey, even though I know you like, more recent, more modern films, this one's worth your time to watch?
In terms of Night of the Living Dead in particular?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would say, you mentioned before we started recording, you mentioned CGI and how that's a technology and a tool that you appreciate. And when you've kind of become used to it, and when you see something that is not that, it seems jarring. And I think this in particular is a movie that can show you the effectiveness of practical effects rather than CGI. Now, it's some very gruesome stuff, so there's the warning, right?
Right.
It just for that alone, you got to know you're going to deal with some gruesome imagery as well. But I would say try to picture. I wouldn't say it's the most terrifying scene in the movie, because for me, again, it goes back to when those loved ones turn and start attacking.
That little girl, when she was coming at you with the trowel, that was legitimately
that's probably the most
very
terrifying.
Chilling.
That whole sequence where the couple has tried to escape and they get overrun outside in the truck, and they're basically eating them. And you're seeing, I don't know, Philip, you might have some background stories on this, whether they went to like the local butchers, or maybe they had a friend who was a butcher too.
Yeah,
but
one of the investors had like a butcher shop, and he provided them with all the stuff.
I figured that was a story. But you see that they're actually like biting down on meat. And now again, someone might say, why does anyone want to see that at all? Okay, that's a separate conversation. But to your question, Vince, I think this is a good example for someone to experience that and see how that will make you squirm in a way that a pixelated spleen, just is not going to. And not to say one is better than the other. I'm all for advancing technology and using the right technology in film for the right purpose at the right time.
Sure.
But I also do love watching some of these older films that you do use practical effects and getting that tactile sense. When you watch those scenes, you could reach out if you were on that set and touch what's there, and your finger would get sticky. When you're watching a CGI film, in the back of your mind, if you were on that set, your finger would like maybe poke against a green screen if you're lucky, but possibly not even that. And again, in some instances, that's how to get the best effect, to use a green screen technology. In a movie like this, you need the squish. You need to be able to sense that your finger would feel something gross to fully get the effect of what the movie is going for.
That's good.
I was thinking too, like from a standpoint, like this film really has to stand on the dynamics of the characters in the house and like their performances, their lines, their acting, the tension that's created, because they don't have a big budget to go blow up a gas station, right? Instead, you have Ben describing this situation where this gas truck is being overrun and what it was like for him to turn around and look at the diner and see that he was already engulfed.
And he totally sells it, doesn't he?
And the way that he knew that there was no hope for anybody is the scream stopped. It just, the writing, like they don't show it, but the actors have to bring all of that, and they do. They're all just in the, like at the end of the day, they're just folks standing in a house. with a few people with wax on their face outside, like, but you don't even see too much of the zombies outside, like
No, there's like
most of the
two.
time it's boarded up.
There's only like two good wide shots of a horde. Usually it's just a couple at a time with
Yeah.
insert shots of them like eating disgusting like pieces of meat. Like it really is built on the performance of the characters.
And even that was fairly late in the movie when they had already brought the TV out and saw about, oh, okay, there's this space that maybe we can get to if we can get the truck filled up and get everybody in there. And then we can be safe, so they hatched this plan, which it was another fun aspect of the film. But for a lot of that time, it's just this tension building of like, they're out there and they're eventually we're going to have this conflict with them. And like, we have to be as ready as possible and everybody needs to be doing their part. But then there's all of this, they can't get it together. They can't get along.
I'm so glad you mentioned that monologue, Trevor, from Dwayne Jones about escaping, because that's another example of having to make do, not having the budget, not having the ability to recreate that scene, which the Hollywood, version would probably open with, right? But instead, they give us something that is somehow more chilling because it's the same experience of reading about something scary and your imagination fills it in a way that's often more terrifying than if it was visualized for you. Yeah. And Dwayne Jones sells it. I mean, that scene is probably the reason this is one of the great horror performances. Yeah. Because he's bringing all that to bear in a genre that isn't always unfairly, I think, remarked upon for its performances, but it's moments like that show you the particular type of acting that is effective in the horror genre.
Yeah, we said this about Us too. When we were talking about Us, I was talking about a lot of horror is intimate, which was one of the things that made Us weird, just because it really does zoom out. But like, if you were in the moment, that's how you would experience the horror of that story, right? You wouldn't have this like kind of godlike, omniscient drone view of the explosions and all this
You're
stuff.
literally boarded up in a house.
You'd just be boarded up in a house with danger outside that you can't quite see, that you don't quite know about, and then there's just this guy telling you what he's been through.
Yeah, it would be very difficult to imagine yourself saying like, oh man, y'all in this situation, but I would have done it different. It's like, how? Where, for what, when, like, what are you talking about? Like, if you're in this exact situation, you are not you are beholden to the same circumstances that they are in, and so it does bring you in a way where it's like you're no different. And so what would you do? Because you couldn't do anything outside of what they could. It actually reminds me, so this is a tiny sidebar, but it does remind me, I recently saw a film called Smile. I don't know if you've seen the trailers for that.
Oh, how was that? I haven't seen it yet.
Can't wait to see it.
So, okay, I don't want to spoil anything.
Please don't spoil it.
I'll be honest. So, like you, Josh, I have a very deep appreciation for horror films, and a lot of that is fueled by like I think horror can really communicate a lot of what people experience, depending on obviously the film. But sometimes horror can really take you into like how maybe certain aspects of mental health people deal with, or just how people deal with grief, or those deeper kind of unsettling emotions, but it's personifying that in a way, and that's why I've learned to appreciate that. But I bring up Smile because as we're talking about, hey, if you were in this situation that these people were in Night of the Living Dead, this particular situation that pans out in Smile, it reminds me of that. It gives you that very same kind of feel of like, if I were faced with this circumstance, there's no way I can imagine myself experiencing this any different than anybody else. Now, there was some CGI, and some of it was a little wonky. I'm like, come on, bro.
It looks so good. I cannot wait.
It's one of the few movies, like I've gotten so used to horror films that like you'll have to actually put some effort in to actually like make me scared. Like I'll be like, oh, that was interesting, but I won't be like, I'm a little unsettled. This one, I was like, All right, I'm gonna need to, we need to do a Bible study after this or something. I need
Audiences
to,
are
I need
really
to,
responding to it. It's been
yeah,
making
I need to
over
watch The
10
Office
million.
or something like refresh my palate because that one was, and I say all that to say I'm glad for Night of the Living Dead because that core essence of, really bringing the audience in, I think still lives. Obviously, you have some Hollywood generated ones that's just, they're trying to get a jump scare here or there and it's whatever. But every now and again, you will get a film that reflects some of that principle. And I think Smile was definitely one of those.
Well, and as you're describing, how horror can work in representing those deeper emotional terrors, really,
Mhm.
that we all experience, but maybe not in these extreme scenarios. That's the realm, of another subgenre of horror. I find psychological horror, which is
Hmm.
maybe one of my favorites,
Yeah.
actually. And we've been getting some good ones along those lines. Whatever it stands in, the terror that the characters are dealing with is an exaggeration of something that
Mhm.
probably most people sitting in the audience experience on a different level and in a different way.
Yeah.
And so then it's a way of exercising it in some ways,
Mhm.
confronting it, admitting it. And the best horror movies, will also force us to ask not only, well, what is it that we're afraid of? Why are we afraid of this? But then, okay, is there a gospel answer that we as
Yeah.
Christians know is out there? And maybe, every once in a while we might see hints of that answer in the film itself. Not
Mhm.
always. Horror is more interested, as the name implies, in the awfulness of the experience
Sure.
and representing that. But every once in a while you'll find movies that offer that gospel answer too. So that's one thing I do like, especially about psychological horror.
Mhm.
Yeah, one of the things I appreciated also about Night of the Living Dead was the originality and the practicality of it. Like, stuff doesn't go the way you think it'll go. And even it doesn't even break bad in the way you think it's going to. And that was kind of the feeling I got as they got towards the end and they're making their plan for the truck escape. And it's like, well, we don't have the keys to the gas pump. Okay, we find the keys. It's like almost felt like escape roomy for a second there.
Sure.
Like, okay, get the thing to do the thing. They're like, all right. And then dude's getting in the truck. Girlfriend wants to come with him in the truck, and you're like, is she gonna get eaten? I mean, this is the end of her. And then
Yeah.
they all make it to the truck safe. I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect them all to make it to the truck safe. And then they get to the gas pump. And you're like, okay. I mean, maybe they'll make it out of this thing. I don't know. Like, I don't know what the ending of this movie is going to be. Like, maybe they'll get on to the next thing and then, get down the road or something and get attacked. And just the tragic stupidity of just like I spill the gas all over the torch that I'm using to keep the zombies
After the
away.
gas key didn't work and they shot it off.
Yes, that was good. The key's not working. They just shoot it off. Yes,
It's like,
What would
whoa,
a horror movie
that's
be
a
without bad decisions, though? I
I was
mean,
like, well,
come
that's
on.
a strong
True.
choice of Ben literally shooting the lock off a gas pump. I thought that was going to go badly. I'd
Yeah,
forgotten
that's
exactly
true.
how it went.
Yeah, and like, yeah, it wasn't the dude standing right there too. Like definitely not a
Yeah.
lot of firearm safety going on, but. Of all the things that could go wrong, like it's just so dumb. Like you just spill gas on the store, but like I don't mean that in a bad way. Like it's dumb in the way that stuff happens like that. Like in
No, like they're fearing for
high
their life. They're like,
tense
these ghouls
situations.
are
Yeah,
like maybe 30 to 60 seconds away. Let's go. And they
yeah.
spill some gas. They set the truck on fire
And the
and
way
it
that like
explodes.
thriller movies and action movies, it seems like just don't take into account very often. It feels like we're like it would not all come off to plan. Like something stupid would happen. It's just like something stupid happens and it doesn't work. It like sets the truck on fire. They can't get out the truck. Her sweater is caught or something. They have
Well,
like
there's
Yeah, her jacket
another
was caught on the door. Yeah.
yeah, and
yeah,
you
there's another quality to Romero's zombie films in particular, which is fatalism. And that's,
Mm.
the sense that it's going to go wrong in the end. And no matter how many of these things you take care of, there will be another one behind it. And you can't stop them. And in addition to, all of these other various themes we've touched on in some of his other movies and in this one, in some ways that's the overriding message, which
Mm,
is a very nihilistic one.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
But I
true.
think it's definitely a recurring quality that these are very fatalistic films he makes. And, I think Night of the Living Dead, again, is the prime example with Ben, just
Oh
in the
my
moment,
goodness.
he thinks that he's going to finally have escaped being regarded, as many Americans did, black folks at the time, as not worth sparing, not worth surviving,
Mm,
not on the level of a human being, and essentially dispatched as if he were a zombie. I mean, it's
mm,
as we were talking back and forth, Philip, about Romero's intentions, you have to think
mm.
that they knew what they were doing with that finale.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like when you watch it now, and even so, this was, I forgot what year I first watched this. Probably sometime like in the early 2010s when I first watched this, which kicked me. Like I liked some like popcorn horror here and there, but actually watching this film, probably about somewhere between 10 and 15 years ago, is what really kind of activated me into like, let me really look at horror, because I mean, I was in. And then as the end of the movie kind of winds up, Ben is the one guy who survives this whole thing. He's been the most competent character the whole
Mm.
time. He's spoken up for himself. He's played things correctly. He's waited it all out. He's been kind of like the realist, and you don't have to think about a lot as, oh, this is a black character, but looking at it through that lens, it's like, yeah, like he's a survivor.
Mm.
He's used to surviving his whole life. So he's the sole survivor of the night of terror. And then in the morning, as he's like, he hears gunshots, which again, this is kind of an interesting play. Like when we talked about Get Out on our episode, it kind of plays with audience expectations, because him
Oh, he's
being
gonna be saved.
a human being going, oh, like gunshots, they are dispatching or the ghouls, I guess, in their mind. They're killing these characters. The good guys are here. The cops are here.
The cavalry's
But
arrived,
but again, for
which was
him,
his plan. Like, we're gonna hold out.
we're gonna
We'll make
hold
it.
out until the reinforcements come, and reinforcements have came. Like, hooray! But as he peeks his head out of the window, and like he's standing there with a
With
gun
a
in
gun.
his hand,
Yeah.
like he's not looking like a zombie. But the posse sees him and just kind of coldly, and not even like in a harsh way,
Right
just
between
very
the
coldly,
eyes.
like, oh, put one right in between his eyes. And he just gets it, and they keep moving on. They throw his body in the pile, and it's just like, what a gut punch that must have been. I read one story, or heard a story about the guy who portrayed that posse guy. Like at the premiere of the movie, he was watching it in a theater in a predominantly black neighborhood, and like there was almost a riot there just with
Oh,
him being there
Sheesh.
personally, kind of as the face of that. Like audiences felt that immediately. And then remember, the movie came out right after MLK's assassination, and
Mm.
man, that must have been
ooh.
quite quite an opening it got.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie to you. I called that one. When I saw the news kind of coverage of how they were exterminating bodies,
Yeah.
I was like, they're
Mm.
probably gonna shoot the guy
You
at the
think
end.
posse right away,
Oh.
almost.
Yeah, almost immediately, I was like, I'm pretty sure they're gonna shoot that guy at the
Wow.
end, because it's just like
Yeah.
the way he's describing the extermination. It's like you're not checking for those who are actually alive. The only ones that are alive are the ones that are with you.
Mm-hmm.
And so anybody you're seeing, you're killing. And so I was like,
Yeah.
if Ben survives, he's probably gonna get shot. And then lo and behold, I was like,
Mm.
don't call me a prophet, but I called that one.
I think I heard this from either Unspooled or the other podcast I listened to, but they were talking about how like the way they shot it and everything, it's almost as if the posse becomes its own horde. Like
Mm.
they're almost shot in the same way. They're kind of like slowly walking across the field, and like because you kind of know, like there is kind of this sense of like you're hopeful, but they're also doom, like just closing in on the situation practically as far as what actually happens.
Yeah.
It ends
Well, how
up
about the
being
use
that way.
of, you mentioned, Philip, earlier, the K9 units,
Oh
and,
man,
right away, you see these posses with dogs, and already, certainly for audiences in '68, are familiar with the images of Civil War protests and
yeah,
police using dogs there. So there's another element that maybe, they just had that at their disposal, friends who had these dogs and they thought it would be an element, but I don't know. It seems awfully pointed to me.
Yeah, it sure does.
It's so on the nose. It's just so on the nose. You're like this, either it's just the reality of the culture that we live in that like these things go together.
Yeah, it's like this is
like,
America
you can't
moment.
avoid it. Yeah,
Going like you can't not see that.
Yeah. It's super fascinating. And then and the way he's kind of treated like
so coldly.
Honestly, I just thought like it's bookended, right? Like so like the beginning of the movie, Jonathan, the brother who dies right away. Usually there's like this moral aspect of horror where like the people who die have it coming in some way, and not always, but like Jonathan was one of those characters where like right off the bat he's kind of being a jerk. He's making light of death. He's making light of this family member that they've come to honor. He doesn't care about it. And there's a lot of disrespect in the way he's talking. Yeah. And then immediately he's the first victim that we see.
He makes a joke about his own soul being damned in the first like 2 or 3 minutes
right away. And so like the movie then it opens with the disrespect of the dead, and it kind of closes with the disrespect of the dead, where you have this hero in a way, like the hero of the movie, the guy who's worked really hard, and then just his flesh is being carried off by meat hooks, as they're getting them into the fire, and they just ending with those really poignant shots. Yeah. And there's no long credit scene, like the credits are kind of rolling as this is all happening, and you almost don't see the credits
like
because it's just like everything that's going on.
It was shot like it was news footage, like it wasn't cinematic. Ends. It was just kind of matter of fact,
and then it's just boom, and then he's on fire, and like movie over, and you're like, wow, it's it's such a gut punch.
Powerful.
Yeah. Whew. It's a good film. Jeez, it's a good film. There's more we could say about it, but it's a lot.
So, Josh, you said this is on your personal top 10. What are some of the other notable entries there?
Oh, I think it might be my only zombie film on there. Actually, no, I'm looking at it now. 28 Weeks Later, actually.
Nice.
I love both 28. The 28 Days Later film as well, but 28 Weeks just has a little political subtext that
interesting. You said 28 Weeks is on your top 10?
Yeah, bumps it ahead for me. My favorite horror film of all time is A Nightmare on Elm Street, and that's another podcast, I'm sure.
I like your mock cover for your book.
Yeah, that's why I had a friend kind of play with that, because it is my favorite, and largely because some of the imagery we get. So yeah, I guess I have 2 zombie movies on that top 10 list.
There you go.
For me, so as the person who is more into the modern films these days, I will say my like break-in film when it came to zombie films was World War Z.
Oh, really?
I like that one.
And here's the thing, because a lot of people don't like that.
I know.
I like it.
Yeah, it's okay. It's kind of more like an action movie.
It is more like an action movie, but the reason why is because for the most part, prior to World War Z, and you correct me if I'm wrong, because I might not have seen a film like it, but prior to every single zombie television show, every single zombie movie, it was these very slow, very docile, very dumb zombies,
which is how
just like
the zombies were.
As long as you can outrun them, as long as you can outpace them, then or maybe disguise yourself as one of them and just walk slowly with them and smell dead or whatever, then you'll be fine. And then you get this evolution where they are every single zombie is Usain Bolt, like. They are ravenous.
It was kind of wild in that movie.
Yeah, and that's the part that for me that was terrifying, because I am imagining myself in that situation, and I'm like, I can run. I'm a pretty decent runner, but I don't know if I would survive that, because these guys, I mean, every single one of them, once they turned, they were on you. And
you should check out the 28 Days and 28 Weeks Later.
I was going to say, I mean, 28 Days Later, that can't be the first fast zombie film.
I think 28 Days Later was one of the
first. It's one of them, and it works the same way. Vince is these
fast.
These are
they're like rabid
monsters,
people.
rabid. and there's a different level. So it has a lot of the same, zombie things you're afraid of, but also that added panic. It adds a level of panic. Instead of the slow
Absolutely.
burn terror of the shuffling zombies, it's the panic of the racing ones.
The Dawn
Yeah.
of the Dead remake had the fast ones too, and it's very popcorn and very
That's right,
silly in
yep.
some ways, but in some ways I like it too. I've been thinking this week, really dwelling on this movie. I've always said that Romero's Dawn of the Dead is my favorite, but I'm like, I still think I like it a little bit more, but his whole initial trilogy, I could not recommend higher. They're all very different. Day of the Dead was very jarring the first time I saw it, but I think they're all masterpieces.
Well, what I will say about, the shuffling, moaning zombies, the traditional zombies,
Hmm.
is that I think there's some interesting theological resonance there as well. And I won't go into this. I know we probably have to wrap up, but one of the things I like about that zombies make us think about is the Imago Dei, and
Yeah.
when our being created in the image of God is lost. And that's one of the terrors, I think,
Mm.
especially for Christians about zombie movies, is that we're watching people where that is drained
Mm.
and left behind. It's not just that you've lost a loved one, but they've become monstrous in exactly the way they've lost their Imago Dei. And part of that is individuality, right? We're all created as
Mm.
individual beings. And so what do these hordes do when we see them shuffling through coming towards the house in Night of the Living
Mhm.
Dead? They're all the same. They all
Yeah.
move the same.
Mm.
They have their arms stretched out the same. They're grasping in the same way. And it's a terrible image of us separated from ourselves as created beings. And so I really like, although there's, that panic isn't there with the Romero zombies, the shuffling zombies, and a lot of
Mhm.
times people joke about them. But I think it does have that sort of existential level of dread to it that I appreciate.
You get that moment
Yeah.
to have contemplation, right? Like when Ben finally, like, he shoots the guy in the chest. He shoots Harry. He shoots him in the chest, but then he comes back, and before he shoots him in the head, there's that moment of what you just talked about. The audience has to do, like, okay, like this was a person. Like, what is
Yes.
happening? Who
Yes.
was he? What is he now?
You have to reckon
Like,
with the act, even if it's the right act. And
exactly.
Right.
and then even when it's, those moments where it's someone you've known before, it's not just
Mhm.
some stranger, it's really making you reckoning with that reality as well.
Man, Dawn
Yeah,
of the Dead
Josh.
has a great moment of that.
We'll have to have you back for zombie theology.
Well, I got
For
a whole
sure.
chapter of it in the book, so.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So shout outs. We have a segment, Josh, on our podcast. Every episode, we have folks come and shout out what is something they've been enjoying, whether that's media, a book, a movie, audiobook, just anything that they've been enjoying recently. And we love to give that time to our guests when they come on. So what's something that you would like to shout out that you've enjoyed recently?
Yeah, I'll hit you with a book. It's The Battle for Middle Earth, written
Ah.
by Fleming Rutledge, an Episcopal priest and just amazing thinker. And this book, I'm going to admit, was just recommended to me. I feel embarrassed. I wasn't aware of it before, by someone I work with over at Think Christian, Claude Acho. But he was on a recent podcast that we had, the Think Christian podcast, talking about Rings of Power and all things
Mm.
Tolkien. And he referenced this book, which is basically a theological interpretation of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings novels. And
Wow.
in the one sense, that seems obvious because most people know about Tolkien's Catholic background. But those stories are not explicitly allegorically Christian in the way that C.S. Lewis's Narnia books are. So I think there's a little more room for mining theological resonance in them. And I am thoroughly enjoying Rutledge's approach in doing that. Again, I'm not like the hugest Tolkien nerd. Of course, I read all the books when I was younger right away and have loved, the movies, Peter Jackson's films, but haven't really delved into the languages and all that stuff. But I'm
Mhm.
starting to get a little hooked by the
Interesting. You're
battle for
speaking
Middle
Trevor's
Earth.
language now.
Oh yeah, I'm
So,
all over this.
yeah, so
I
so
was
I
reading
would
The Hobbit to my girls last night.
Oh, I remember those days. Those are great days. Wow. Wow. Have fun with that. Treasure
Will
that.
do.
But yeah. So that I would recommend that book, and then alongside it, I'll plug over at Think Christian. We just put together an ebook on all of the screen adaptations of Tolkien's work. It's a Lord of the Rings Tolkien ebook. So if you want to get that, you can get it for free at thinkchristian.net/Lord of the Rings. So a lot of Tolkien in my world right now, and I'm really enjoying the Battle for Middle Earth.
I'll be putting that in the show notes, and any maybe 1 or 2 recent horror picks for October viewings if anybody wants to continue in the spooky season watching.
Oh, so yeah, more Think Christian plugs here, but for our Defense of Horror episode, which we do each year, we're on a Christian Defense of Horror 4
I love these
this year.
episodes.
That's coming out. It might
Are you
be
going
out
to come
by the
out as an
time.
Exorcist fan this year?
No, I don't think I'm going to go that far.
Okay.
But we do talk about Barbarian, which is a
I
recent
love
release
Barbarian.
that is just
Yes.
bonkers. I mean, I'm not going to say anything else about it except that it's bonkers.
Go
And so we
see
talk
it.
about that paired with John Carpenter's 1978 Halloween. We usually on this episode like to talk about a classic and a new release. So it's Barbarian, which I would recommend to horror fans, and then Halloween. And yeah, that Think Christian podcast episode should be out right around the time this is out.
I cannot wait to listen to that.
That's fun. Love it.
That is awesome.
Josh, I will have a link for the pre-order of Fear Not in the show notes, but where else would you like people to go to follow you? You have another previous book out about movies as well.
Yeah, this is my second. So Movies Are Prayers has been out for a couple years now and still is available wherever you get your books. So again, an attempt at Christian film criticism. And I try to find a particular way through the lens of prayer to do that. And
Awesome.
yeah, if you're listening to this because you love horror, my next book will be out next year around this time. And I'm sending out email updates to keep people in the loop on that. So the best place to go is fuller.edu/fearnot. Sign up. I'll keep you in the loop. And yeah, I can't wait for that to come out next year.
Excellent.
Awesome.
That's really cool. I think that's so awesome too, like to be having like folks like you, and I think about Brett and other guests that we've talked to, just really working through, we're building this theology, right? Like we have this medium and this new form of human art and expression that like we don't have 1,000 years of church history to telling us how to think about that and what to do. And like works like what you guys are doing is engaging in like kind of building that for Christians. And you know, it's going to be awesome like 50, 100 years from now, people to look back and say like, well, here's a wealth of resources and ways in which we can approach and think about these mediums from a Christian perspective within the theology that we've held, you know, this ancient theology and its modern applications. Is really awesome.
Wow, thanks. That's a lot of pressure to look at it from that perspective. but I agree, there are a lot of folks doing good work along those lines. In my experience, it's shifted from making the argument that we can watch films that are not necessarily made from a Christian perspective, and we've kind of most people I feel like have settled that question. But now we're working through how do we do it?
Yeah.
And so it's an exciting period to see, like I said, a bunch of folks doing good work just as critics, as everyday critics, some of them doing books as well, podcasts, actually doing this theological mining. It's very exciting to see.
Yeah. I think that's the power of Christ and his church right there. Like it's amazing.
100%.
Awesome. Well, Josh, thanks so much for joining us. Have we given you a chance to share links and everything yet?
Oh, I think I hit you with plenty. So
we got lots of those out there.
Yeah,
all right.
Thank you guys for the conversation, for your excitement, for those of you who already came to Night of the Living Dead, and then for your interest and openness to talking about it. Makes for a good discussion to have all those perspectives.
Love it. Thanks so much. Friends, listeners, audience of The Substance, that was our guest, Josh Larsen of Think Christian and Film Spotting, also of Chicago, apparently. Man, what a fun ride that was, and just loved his perspective and the work that he's doing.
I'm so glad I got you guys to watch this movie. I'm glad you liked it, Trev.
I might watch it again next Halloween.
That's what's up. Hey, man, we should do Dawn of the Dead. We should continue. If you guys enjoy the show and want to be a part of it, you guys can join us at Anchor. We don't have a Patreon. We have Anchor. That's where you go if you want to support the show monthly at $5 or $10 a month. Or if you really like what we do and you want to throw a little bit in our tip jar, you can do that on Cash App. Send a couple bucks over at $the Substance Pod, and we thank you.
If you want to follow us on socials, if you want to listen to our episodes, if you want to know what's on our blessed playlist, then you need to visit thesubstancepod.com. And there you will find all of our socials, all of our episodes, and all of our songs and episodes that we've enjoyed on the blessed playlist. So visit us at thesubstancepod.com.
And as we come into spooky season, we're coming into the end of 2022, the year of the voicemail. So go ahead and pull your phone out and dial these numbers: 913-703-3883.
Tell us what your favorite substantive horror movie is.
There you go. There's
Love it.
really not too many of those. And then
Get out of here.
ha, 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 ha. I see what you did there. Speaking of getting out of here, I'm one of your three hosts, Trevor.
And I'm Philip.
And I'm Vincent.
And we'll see you next time
on The Substance.
We gone.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I remember cackling at Shaun of the Dead when they did that line. That was so great.
Listen, Mum, sit tight, okay? You're not safe there. We're coming over.
I don't want to cause a fuss.
We're coming to get you, Barbara.